I have no fucking clue what I saw. But I know I saw what I saw. Sailors, what's the creepiest, scariest, or most unnerving thing you've seen/witnessed while at sea? I worked on tugboats for about 6 years. The back deck is considered a wet deck, meaning it isn't unusual for it to be underwater at times. We were making tow with an oil rig at sea with waves that were 14 to 16 and one hit us just right, taking my coworker George and pulling him out to sea. Now it's 3 a.m. and pitch black. This is nearly always a death sentence. About 20 seconds later, which felt like an eternity, another wave brought George back on deck, plopping him safely on his ass right next to the winch. George laughed and got right back to work without missing a beat. I'm mostly a lurker on here, didn't think this would take off the way it did. Thanks for the silvers. Let me know if you wanted to hear some more sea stories. I've got some about drunk people getting on our boat, a small boat filled with half-assed pirates trying to get on our barge, and a bonus story of one of the times I almost drowned in the rudder room. A similar thing happened to me on a shrimper out in the Gulf. Man got washed overboard and immediately disappeared in 10 to 15 foot seas. Captain started to turn the boat around when the guy popped up alongside the boat, lifted by a big wave. He was so close I actually reached out and grabbed him by the hood on his rain suit and held him long enough for another crew member to help get him on board. This guy didn't go back to work. He laid on the deck and vomited and turned pure white. He didn't come out of his bunk until we got back to the docks, and he never went shrimping again. My dad and I were sailing in the Sea of Cortez. It was early morning with some patchy surface fog. I was 14 or 15 at the time. We heard what sounded like applause in the distance, but becoming louder. We could soon see a patch of disturbed water getting closer and closer, and hundreds of objects flying out of the water and splashing back down. A few of them flew out, hit the deck of the boat and bounced back into the water, stingrays. A whole school of them, jumping out of the water for some reason. It was weird and awesome. The Sea of Cortez gives me nightmares. I'm not a boat person, but I remember taking an overnight boat ride through the Sea of Cortez as a kid and was asking about life jackets. They said they'd usually hand them out, but not that night, and kind of cringed at the question and said the red devils would take anyone in the water. That night was a full moon, and I swear, the sea was teeming. Fine, you happy now? With the biggest damn squid you're ever likely to see on the surface. Apparently, they take chunks out of people and swarm like piranhas. I don't know if it was an exaggeration, but those things, man. They threw some fish guts over the side and it was like a frenzy. I wouldn't want to get caught out there in the water with them. Giant spears plunging in and out of the sea, lol. In the Gulf of Alaska, I have seen some shit. But one of the most terror-inspiring things I've seen is what can happen with some of the loose logs from the logging trade. Sometimes when a big log gets loose from a raft, it becomes partially waterlogged and floats small end up. So you have this 4-foot diameter telephone pole in the sea, sticking up 40 feet into the air. No biggie. Shows up on radar, and easy to spot. Now, give that pole 20 years of floating around or so. It rots in such a way that it becomes filled to a point by wind and waves, and looks quite menacing. Now, put it in a gale with 25-foot waves, 50 feet trough to peak. And it becomes a towering spike of death that shoots up from the sea every 15 to 20 minutes, out of nowhere, 60 feet into the air, only to plunge down into the dark depths, waiting to skewer some unsuspecting boat in a few minutes when it thrusts out of the ocean again. It is a genuine terrifying sight, rare, but not so rare that I haven't seen two in one season. It's like the spiked dick of Neptune looking for an opportunity to fuck your shit up in a particularly terrifying way. 2 years ago I was about 150 miles offshore from Long Island, NY, in a 31-foot boat. We were trolling for yellowfin tuna. In the distance, we saw 2 hugfins coming out of the water, so we headed towards them thinking it was a couple of sharks. As we got closer, we realized it was one big shark there. It was just cruising slowly at the surface, not even the slightest bit disturbed by us approaching. Once we got up next to it, we realized that this shark was almost as big as the boat. It had to be at least 25 feet long and several thousand pounds. I was in absolute shock as we passed it. I'd never seen a shark even close to that big. I've seen plenty of whales, turtles, dolphins, sharks, all kinds of crazy things out at sea. But never a predator this large. It was definitely not a whale shark. This thing was a killer. I want to say that it was a tiger shark, but the internet says they don't even get close to that big, so I really just don't know. I wish I could have gotten a picture of it, but I was just frozen, I couldn't even move. I will never forget that moment. The ocean is an incredible place. A couple of years ago I was sailing as a cadet on a merchant vessel and I was scheduled on the evening watch. The rest of the crew was enjoying dinner and I was to call if anything went wrong. We were sailing over open ocean, no land within a day sailing around us, and all of a sudden I notice an island coming up on my bow. It was still far away but it shouldn't be there. I looked at the maps, checked my position multiple times, and then I noticed the island did not appear on my radars. I called down to the mess room to tell there was a weird island in front of us. The chief mate came up and checked again the maps and positions. He also noticed that the radars did not see the island. We called the captain and when he came up he started laughing. He was an old sailor with over 40 years of experience under his belt. He explained to us it was a Fata Morgana. The real island was more than a day sailing away in the direction we were heading at that moment. After that incident, he took over the watch and I went down. It wasn't really creepy but it was strange. A mate of mine I was working on a tuna boat with came across an airplane emergency life jacket floating in the water about 200 miles out at sea, east coast of New Zealand. Not a sailor, however this was at sea. My dad went boating with some friends down near Rocky Point in Mexico in the mid-90s. They went out late at night to drink. It was incredibly dark apart from the boat lights when suddenly a helicopter flew above their boat and the locals who took them out shut everything off immediately. The helicopter hovered over some water in the distance and dumped a few bodies into the water before flying off. When it was out of sight the locals turned everything back on and shrugged it off saying, "They do that all the time, never seen it so close up before." I did a double-handed overnight race last summer and had a 45-minute conversation with my grandfather while on watch. I was the only one on deck and my grandfather had been dead for 3 years at that point. I'm fairly certain hypothermia, dehydration, low blood sugar, and exhaustion were all in play, but it was super weird. I'm not a sailor but my family owns a boat and I frequently go out on fishing trips in the sea with my dad. It's usually more us talking about life with him doing most of the fishing. Well, on one trip, we were out about I think 10 miles from the beach. My dad was telling me about how he got into and won a bar fight and I was just silently listening when a weird whistling/howling sound sort of surrounded us. I can't really describe it. It was like a cross between a whale and the sound of someone blowing air over an open bottle. My dad looked pretty calm but I could tell he was freaked out too. It went on for about another minute, slowly becoming stronger until it just abruptly ended with a screech from somewhere in the water. We never talk about it and I still wonder what was making that sound. Not a sailor, but a Marine on a ship. We were cruising through the Pacific when we received an SOS from a boat. From what I heard he was trying to cross the ocean by himself. Took a few days to find him. I remember watching off the side of the ship. The sails were imprinted with the Chinese flag. A small team was sent to board the small sailboat. But when they arrived no one was on board. We searched for a body for the following days but found nothing. Still don't know what happened to him. I was pulling a small sailboat mast from the bottom of a lake during a storm. Waves had turtled the boat. So I was about 10 feet down and pulling the mast up and the weight of it pushed me down, so I was basically standing at the bottom of the lake and could see the waves up top. It was an overall weird/frightening/stimulating experience. And then something big swam past me and brushed my leg, must have been at least 3 feet long. I eventually got the boat turned back over and the mast on board and we got towed in. As we hit land I laid down on the beach and decided I wasn't going to go in the water for a couple of days. I hate swimming in lakes and the ocean because I don't want to share my swimming space with big, slimy creatures. I'm scared of deep, dark water to the point where even encountering it in video games gives me anxiety. When I was about 19, maybe 20, my mom's boyfriend at the time decided to take us out on his boat one afternoon so that we could lounge around and swim in the ocean far from the shore. We were super excited because the water was turquoise, completely see-through and the perfect temperature that day. So we found what seemed to be the perfect location, dropped the anchor and had a snack. Before long, we were completely surrounded by hundreds of giant milky white jellyfish. There were so many that we couldn't see clear water anywhere around us. Their bells were easily 5 feet in diameter, if not more. We did not swim that day. This happened to my wife and me when we were in Vieques near Puerto Rico. Except when the jellyfish swarmed the area, we weren't in the boat. We were already in the water doing some snorkeling and were pretty far from the boat. Had to very carefully make our way back. Wife was majorly freaked out. I was on Culebra about 5 years back and swam out the edge of the reef, about 300 to 500 feet offshore. I'm a strong swimmer, but I knew I was a little beyond where I should be, and my wife couldn't see me from shore anymore through the swells. Then out of nowhere, a wall of jellyfish just surrounded me. I thought I was gonna get stung and drown immediately, so I booked it back to shore as fast as I could. I got a few small stings but was okay. Found out later they were moon jellies, and I'd probably have been okay, but I didn't know that at the time. I also found out later from a boat captain that the tiger sharks like to swim in the swarms of moon jellies and sometimes get in a feeding frenzy in there. I stayed closer to shore after that. Worked the shrimp boats in the Gulf back in the 70s. 100 miles off the coast of Louisiana and the sea got dead calm. I mean dead calm, not a ripple or a swell. The sea was so calm that vibrations from the engine idling would make little ripples in the water. The surface of the sea looked like a huge never-ending mirror extending out in all directions. The visual memory I have of seeing that perfectly flat sea in the moonlight is deeply etched in my memory, and I can see it today in my mind just as real as if it was happening now. I could talk about 25-foot seas in the middle of a hurricane, or a half dozen water spouts dancing around us during a summer squall, or sargassum seaweed as far as the eye could see so thick around the boat that you could walk on it. Or flying fish all taking flight at the same time like a flock of birds skimming across the water. But none of that stuff had the impact on me like the dead calm of the sea 100 miles offshore. Not me, but my uncle was once scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef off Australia. He was doing some kind of study for the university he worked for, something to do with how some predators in the ocean hunt by detecting the electrical activity of fish nervous systems. So he finds this big field of sponges. Now, for those who don't know, sponges are basically like plants. They don't move. They're attached to where they grow, and they filter water that moves through them, straining out nutrients. So there's this field with like 1,000 sponges attached to the reef. Now, my Uncle Ray didn't dive alone. I mean, he could, but he didn't. It's safer to have a dive buddy. So he's looking at these sponges and his dive buddy is swimming away after some fish, part of the study I guess. And then the sponges start moving. All at once, they twist and bend, and as one, each seems to reach out, grab onto a different part of the reef, let go of the old part, raise back up on the new perch, and they go back still again. Overall they moved about 1.5 feet. An unexplained undersea mass sponge migration. Jumped into the ocean, in the middle of the Pacific. No gear, no lifeline. Instantly felt so small. The swells were massive and powerful, and I suddenly got this overwhelming sense that literally anything could be just beneath my feet. 10 tenths would jump again. One of my coworkers fled to the US from Vietnam in a small boat as a young child. She was one of the boat people. We were complaining about little shit when she explained why she almost never got upset. She was only 7 when this happened. She and her sister, father, mother, and grandfather were in a small fishing boat in the middle of the ocean. They had been out of food for several days. She and her sisters managed to catch an albatross on the boat. Her father said it was bad luck to kill one and released it. She said as she watched it fly away, she knew then that she and her family were going to starve to death. She hated her father at that point too. The next day they were picked up by a trawler and taken to California. She still wears an albatross necklace for good luck. On deployment in the Persian Gulf, I was part of the VBSS team on my ship. VBSS stands for Visit, Board, Search, and Seizure. We basically boarded the small craft and looked for drugs, and weapons being transported from Iran to other nations in that area. Well, more than often we would be called away to go board a vessel, and when you're on a smaller craft for boarding as opposed to a large warship, you are able to notice the things floating around in the water. The thing that I learned quickly about the Persian Gulf is that there are a lot of dead bodies floating around in it. When you think about why there are bodies in there, it makes sense though. It's a relatively smaller body of water almost entirely landlocked by a region constantly in turmoil. From what was explained to me, it's mostly Iran and its coastal navy just bushwhacking people out there that they think are aiding the enemy, but they end up usually being poor fishermen trying to provide for their families. Not scary, just odd. But one time we were docked in Bermuda and somebody fucked up and dumped the galley waste into the harbor. I have never seen so much marine life in one place. Every type of fish imaginable, turtles the whole whack, all on a feeding frenzy. It got so crazy that you couldn't really see the water anymore for about 5 meters off the ship. Just a mass of crazy writhing fish. I used to sail competitively and never get seasick on boats, but I do when scuba diving in swells. The first time it happened was when I was getting my deep certification. I asked my instructor what to do if I puked into my regulator, and he said some would just naturally come out, and if the regulator seemed clogged, just pop it off and purge it. You'll just feed the fish. Purging is when you press a button to force air and water out. Sure enough, 6 months later I was diving in shallow swells in the Bahamas when I got that rolling feeling. I puked, and my instructor was right. I was instantly swarmed by dozens of hungry reef fish. It was one of the coolest and grossest things I've ever seen. So I was on the port side of the ship on the O2 deck when all of a sudden I see this big glowing object in the water. It must have been around 10 feet in diameter. I actually thought it might have been a big jellyfish at first, but the surface didn't appear to be gelatinous, but rather smooth and solid. As we got closer to it, I still couldn't make out what it was. It was literally just a glowing circular disc about 4 to 5 feet below the surface of the water. Now, this was midday, broad daylight, in the middle of the high seas. Still don't know what the fuck it was. Not a sailor, and it wasn't really scary, just awesome, but I was standing at the bow of a friend boat west of Catalina a few miles, moving at a pretty good clip. I was looking straight down into the water as the hull cut the waves and watching tuna and other pretty large fish moving out of the way / swimming alongside. Suddenly I was looking down at this huge fish I didn't recognize, maybe 7 to 8 feet long and a couple of feet thick. I was about to call out to my buddy when it banked starboard, and I could see that the thing was maybe 3x as tall as it was long. I couldn't even see the bottom of the thing, it was massive. Later found out it was one of these bad boys, sunfish. But at the time I sounded like an idiot trying to describe it. On a Navy ship, we were out on patrol and took a massive lightning bolt to the aft mast at the same time as the wind picked up significantly. We started listing quite heavily and the thunder made it sound like we hit something. Most of us got really fired up and immediately ran below the waterline to do damage assessment. One guy ran to the bridge to check out what had happened. Luckily it was only lightning and not something we'd hit, but it really felt like we had. Apart from fire alarms, I've never been so ready to do damage control in my life. Well, I was on a family friend's boat when I was a teen. Family and friends. 4-day boat trip around Cabo San Lucas area. I don't remember our exact location or anything like that, just that we left Cabo San Lucas. It was late and the adults went to bed. I had my Game Boy and Pokemon to keep my attention. I went out on the deck and sat in a chair around midnight or 11 p.m. to try and catch the red Gyarados. Sometimes in fighting the Gyarados, I saw a light out the corner of my eye. Keep in mind we're out 30 plus miles away from shore, if not more. So I turned to see a bright blue light in the sky. It was an orb? Or like a LED? Anyways, it was holding steady in the sky. Not moving at all? Probably a good head turn up and far away, but didn't seem anywhere near us. After a few minutes of this blue light just sitting there, it moved. Not directly towards us or anything so crazy, but it moved in a straight path across the horizon for a good minute. Still far away, so it appeared. Then it dropped down and then I couldn't see it. Like it dropped into the water or landed on something. To this day I have no fucking clue what I saw. But I know I saw what I saw. Father said it probably a flare or something. But I know they don't move like what I saw. Probably an early drone, I tell myself to this day. This was 2002, by the way. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.